Hi, thanks for tuning in. This is part 3 of a 3-part special series that I did with Ellen Shook, also my mom, about her epic journey from small-town southern U.S. to medium-sized city southern U.S., but with a lot of stops in between and quite a journey it's been. If you haven't heard episodes 1 and 2, those links are in the show notes. Please check them out. But for now, let's get into this one. Welcome back to If I Knew You Better. I'm Brendan Davis, your host, and I'm bringing you, as I just mentioned, part 3 of the interview series with Ellen Shook, my mom. Now, if you haven't heard the first 2 yet, you can still enjoy this one freestanding, but it will make a lot more sense if you heard the context that leads into it. But if you have been following along or even just read the show notes and get the gist of those other episodes, she has had quite a journey, which is why I wanted to sit down and talk with her and not just do this as like a personal family biography project, but actually share it with the world in a bit of an edited form. So this episode's the shortest of the 3, but it covers this later phase from when I went to live with my dad after my sophomore year of high school, and she started to enjoy the world again on her own and only have to worry about taking care of herself day to day. And she built a pretty great life for herself from that point forward. And I'm so happy for that. I'm so respectful of the journey she made. And especially if you've heard the previous episodes, you know that it was not without some pretty major challenges. But I'm glad to bring you this episode, and I want to mention a few things before we get to it. First of all, I want to give a shout out to a few people who helped make this show possible and make it what it is. One is my friend Ronald Paredes. Ronald is an amazing artist, fine artist, graphic artist. He does all kinds of things, design, illustrations, and he's the one who did this show logo as well as the logos for my other shows and actually several other endeavors that I've done creatively. So I want to thank you again to Ronald. I also want to give a shout out to Carl King. You can find him at carlkingdom.com. And Carl is a polymath who does many things, but he is most well known and most in the box of being a musician, a composer, and multi-instrumentalist. And he composed the music for this show, as well as for my previous show, Big Fish in the Middle Kingdom. We use this same music now on How China Works, my third podcast. But Carl really made this really great. I want to mention that next week we have a return to the entertainment industry-based shows. I have Chris Vogler coming on for a round 2, who wrote the classic book, The Writer's Journey. All writers and storytellers in general have probably read this, probably have a copy on their shelf. In my case, I don't know how many times I've gifted it and had the different editions. The 25th anniversary edition is just out. It has a lot of new material and it's really cool. I've enjoyed it. I'm lucky to have a galley. It comes out pretty soon, I think in a couple of weeks. And looking forward to talking with Chris again, and also Ken Lee and Michael Weesey of Michael Weesey Productions, who have been so great about hooking me up with all these really interesting authors from all walks of the entertainment business, which I've been able to bring to you. And last but not least, I want to give a shout out to my girlfriend, Susie Q. She has been not only a great girlfriend, but just a great friend and partner in general, and helping with my keto diet. I'm down about 30 odd pounds in the last 2 months, and I'm really doing well with that. And she's the official keto manager who's helped me to order the right foods. And of course, I would be remiss if I didn't thank again my mom, Ellen Shook, the subject of this interview. I'll have a little piece of news at the end of this, so stay tuned for that. But for now, please enjoy the conversation with Ellen Shook.
So I had a year by myself, and I guess that's what you want to know
about.
So,
yeah. What's it like to be, what was that like?
I went to school.
I know you made some
I kept
friends.
going to school, and I had girlfriends, and we would do things. So I had a little life, and I moved back into a smaller apartment, but it was a nice little place.
Yeah.
And it was close to my new job, and I worked there for about a year before I decided that things, I didn't like the cold weather either.
Right.
Those 2 brutal Colorado winters where they had blizzards and people were expected to just, kind of plow right on through and go to work and live your life like you normally would on a schedule. I was like horrified. Oh no, this is the day I stay in with my head under the covers, and drinking hot chocolate.
Turns out we were there for like a couple. Well, you were there a couple.
You made it through one. And
I did, but turns out those were fairly. They were historically significant in retrospect. Those actually were like historically bad in retrospect, and that happened to be when we were there.
Right, crazy experiences. But anyway, so, I found another guy that I was interested in, and I thought he was interested in me, but come to find out, he was kind of two-timing all along, and, or maybe three-timing, for all I know. He turned out to be not what I thought he was, and so I decided it was just time to leave Colorado, and so before the snow flies, as they used to say up there, and so it was in October when I moved down to Dallas. I had reconnected with an old friend that I had known back in Atlanta, and she was from Texas, and she went back to Texas after she left Atlanta, back to where her family and so forth were, and so she said, "Well, why don't you just come down here and stay with me?" But I got letters, good letters of referrals from the lawyers I worked for at KN Energy.
Yeah, were you a paralegal or?
No, I was a legal secretary.
Legal secretary, okay.
So anyway,
that's when you had your extraordinary typing abilities were in line with.
Well, very quickly honed. And one thing that helped was that we got computers.
Yeah, that was like a new thing back in the day.
Yes, and right after I started to work there, and they needed. I mean, it was literally when I first started that they were putting in that system. And
so you learned from scratch.
Well, yes, but what they did was they sat me in a room for 2 weeks by myself with the instructions, the books and tapes and that sort of thing. Yeah. And I taught myself.
Huh. How about that?
And so I discovered that I could type like a crazy person on a computer, whereas I had on a
typewriter,
electric typewriter or something. It was like, oh God, kill me now. And so anyway, I mean, I seemed to have an affinity for it, and so then it became my job to train everyone else.
Huh.
So I learned, and then I taught them.
Nice.
And so, mainly, I guess you could say what we did was word processing more than all these functions that we do now on a laptop computer or whatever.
But this is
desktop word processors.
You were working for this big law firm.
Well,
doing
it wasn't a law firm then. At that point, the first job I had beside my retail job was a small law firm, and so I get we
that's
had
where
the
you
old
honed your skills
Selectrics
before
there.
you went to
Yes, I got a
Cornell.
little bit better, but we had one old clunky word processor, but we had one girl who did it. But I used to spend time with her, and she was teaching me, so I knew a little bit about how to use a word processor. And then when I went to KN, and they were just getting their equipment installed, literally at the same time I was hired, then they decided, since I had some experience, that I could learn and teach everyone else, and so that's what I did. And I think there were like maybe 5 other secretaries or something, and 2 paralegals. And so, I learned how to do it and then taught them.
Nice.
And I mean, it was so archaic, seems so archaic now, because every night it was the same kind of thing that we used to have to do. It was a modem with the dial-up, I guess is what they call it.
Yeah.
And we used to have to put the phone in the cradle. Well, even back in retail, some of them, that's how we transmitted our data to the home office at night from the computerized cash registers.
Yeah.
We put the phone in a certain
you would set
cradle
and you would leave, and then you would probably go home because it would take a while.
Right. It took all night, and then in the morning, you'd take it off the cradle and boot it up again for the next day. But
imagine trying to send a spreadsheet. Imagine sending a spreadsheet before email, and it took overnight. It took overnight.
I don't know.
For that information to go from A to B.
And I continued to go to school, so I got a few more credits, and so then I went to Dallas, and then you never did really come back to live with me after that.
No, I was.
And so, but you came to visit sometimes.
Sure.
But I
enjoyed
a job.
Visiting. Yeah.
My letters of recommendation got me a job with a big law firm called Lock Purnell Rain Harrell, which later just became Lock Purnell. And I worked for them for 5 years, and I continued to go to school, and you came to visit from time to time. And so anyway, and I got a dog, and life got better.
yeah. That seems like, and that was really nice for me to see, because that was, like I said, of course, I mean, your own self-interest in being a kid. I mean, can you be blamed for pursuing that? But there was also part of it was. But
I didn't have much of a social life anymore.
Me getting to see you, thriving was nice.
Yeah. Well, I had a nice little apartment in North Dallas. I stayed with Terry for a few months, and then I got an apartment. And I had a little extra room, so I had a room, for you or my mother sometimes when she would come. But anyway, because my father had died by then.
Right.
And I think, he died while we were actually still living in Anniston.
Well, I found him. I found him.
Right. But anyway, so it kind of became Three Musketeers against the world at that point.
Yeah, right. You would check in with her, because I was a few hours drive away. I mean, I didn't get there all the time, but I saw her. No. I saw her.
But then when
fairly
you first
frequently.
Started to college,
first year of college, I was in Birmingham. Here, I was at Sanford University, and then driving about an hour and a half back to Anniston on the weekends. Right. Not all the time, but most weekends, because.
But after almost 3 years,
home is where the food and the love is, and the laundry and the. The grandma, the comfy bed and privacy.
After about 3 years of living in North Dallas, I decided I'd about had enough of that and that long commute. Because if I was going to commute anyway back to downtown Dallas to work, that I just wanted to go somewhere a little more peaceful at night.
Right.
And so my dog and I moved to back over to Arlington, and interestingly enough, that's where I met the boy next door that I've been married to for 30 years now.
Exactly. That's the from the 90s to now is Ray.
Yeah, we got married in 1990.
And what was it? Where did you guys meet?
At a Halloween party in 1989.
Yeah.
I used to get out and walk the dog, and I had noticed that there was this gorgeous apartment that was about 14 times as big as mine, because I lived in a studio on the third floor, but it was a little gated complex and so forth, and so it was, a safer, nicer little quiet area. But anyway, then I noticed that the apartment was empty, and I went over and asked how much it was, and I said, I guess I can't afford that, sorry. But anyway, then somebody moved in, and then right after that, the complex had a Halloween party.
Yeah.
And I wasn't going to go, but I had been in therapy with a clinical psychologist for about 4 years at that point. And she said, I think, it's really time for you to start getting out, because I just really had no interest in getting hooked up with men or anything. And I had a few girlfriends here and there, but they were always kind of easy come, easy go. I didn't, no real connection with any of them anymore. But I went to the party, and I had thrown together a half-ass costume at the last minute. I guess I was a mime. I painted my face white, and I wore a black leotard, and I powdered my hair white, and I had this, bright red lipstick and heavy black eye makeup, and then I found some fabric in my stash because, I like to sew.
Yeah.
And I made some kind of bloomer type pants out of a black and white stripe and put some ruffles around my wrists and a big ruffle around my neck that I put together in about 30 minutes.
Huh.
And and I went to the party, and this guy walked up to me, and I thought, man, he's cute, but he's a baby. And he had long, black, curly hair down on his shoulders, and he said he was a pirate, a hippie pirate or something.
Okay.
And he had like this necklace of eyeballs and whatever, that was his costume.
All right.
But anyway, he kept, every time I'd turn around at the party, there he was behind me, and then I decided I'd sit down over by the fire in the clubhouse, and because I'd run out of small talk, and so next thing I know, he's sitting down beside me, and 2 or 3 times he had said, "I'm 27. How old are you?" And I said, "I don't tell my weight or my age." But, we'd just chit-chat and small talk.
Did he suspect you were a lot older, or do you think it's his way of making small talk?
I don't think he knew because of the makeup.
That was just his way of making conversation.
Like a mime. Yeah. But, I think he was kind of wondering, maybe he thought I was a little older than he was.
Yeah.
As it turned out, it was quite a lot older. But anyway, his last-ditch effort at that was when he said, "How old did you say you were?" And I said, "I didn't." And he's, "Darn, I thought I had." But anyway, he said, I said, I think I really, I don't do parties much, and I think I'm ready to go home. I guess I'd been there a couple hours.
Yeah.
He said, "I'll walk you home." And so...
And you felt like that was safe enough in this place. That was a safe contact.
He was harmless. he was a sweetheart. I could tell that, but I just thought he was a child,
Yeah.
And so... he walked me to my apartment door and leaned over and kissed me on the cheek, and I thought that was very sweet. And he said, "Can I take you to dinner tomorrow night?"
No.
And I said, "Okay." And so, at what time? And so we made a time, and I said, "By the way, where do you live at here?" And he said, "Oh, in the building right next to you." And come to find out, he had the apartment.
He was the guy that got the place you wanted.
He rented the apartment that I wanted.
Huh.
But anyway, so he had quite a story of his own, and I don't guess there's any point in going into all that here. But we saw each other a lot, and he loved my dog. And of course, the poor dog had been locked up in the apartment all day, every day, waiting for me to come home, and then I had to walk him for an hour, but get rid of some of that energy. The thing, he was a Cocker Spaniel, and he's quite little, and he was energetic. So eventually I just gave him a key to my apartment because he would go over and get the dog when he was home. So the dog had company, and he did too. And of course, by then he knew I was a lot older than he was, and he hadn't run away. So I figured, maybe that's a pretty good sign. But I still didn't see it going anywhere.
Yeah.
I was aware that I had feelings for him pretty early on, and I think he was very conflicted about it.
Because of the age difference?
I don't know. And then I guess he must have told his family, and they were on his case about, you were just some middle-aged gold digger after you and your money and blah, blah. But anyway, we've had a lot of hurdles and a lot of history to deal with, especially with his family. Oddly enough, mine, who are so conventional, were a lot more accepting of him than his ever were of me.
Yeah. Your mom, my grandmother, she just loved Ray, and he loved her like a
and he was
mama.
The son she should have had when she was in her decline, and we took care of her.
Yeah, no, he really. I'm so glad.
5 years, I wouldn't have been able to manage what we did for her without him.
I know, because I was still working my way. I had been working my way through college, and then by that point, I'm trying to scratch around and get established in my business, which has only taken forever. And Ray's been awesome, and it's a little funny point of order. You've already given up the point of order because you've been watching the damn hearings. Sorry, it's sounding like a lawyer. We're recording this to date this. We're recording this
on the third day.
On the Friday when Marie Yovanovitch testified in the impeachment hearings of the hopefully soon to be former President Trump. But yesterday was the shooting in Santa Clarita, where I have a lot of friends in that area, and actually one friend and her family's on the block where that happened. So that's kind of crazy, and talking about challenges of life. But in terms of Ray, it was always funny because it took us a long time to get our. Well, because he's only 5 years older than me.
I know.
So and to his credit, he really made an effort, and I made an effort in my way. It probably both things were not always probably obvious to the other, but we both made efforts.
And I always felt, kind of in the middle, of course, but
Well, you were. Because you were.
But, well,
but in a different way.
That's true. But, as for me, I continued to go to school, and
Sure,
he made
sure.
that possible. I stopped working, and then I would actually take temp jobs in between, whenever I wanted to work or wanted some money for something, I'd just go get a temp job.
Yeah.
But he provided a nice home for me and a comfortable living, and early on, I guess about 2.5 years into our marriage, we realized because of my mother's health issues,
right.
that we were going to have to relocate closer to her because we'd already tried to dislodge her and bring her to Texas, and that was a no sale. So we moved back to Alabama.
Yeah, and I remember part of it. He and
he loved it here.
Yeah, exactly. That's where I'm going. That's where I was going. My comment is that
done very well.
People who don't know this place or this state, and hey, if you're socially conservative, this is your sweet spot, and if you're not, then it could be very trying. And but the fact is, this is. Regardless of everything else, at a bare minimum, this is a beautiful state.
It's called Alabama the Beautiful.
Exactly,
it says so on the signs.
And if you go top to bottom through it, you see almost. I mean, I don't think there's really any desert to speak of, but there's almost everything else.
Yeah, we're kind of short on desert.
We're short on desert. You don't really have plains. But I mean, there's mountains, there's valleys, there's coastal stuff. You have some you have developed cities and things like
forests.
That. So it's a very but
water.
Especially the drive between here and where she did live, so green, so many, and he was just in love with the place, like geographically.
He loves hills and trees.
Yeah.
The first 2 years that we lived here, we leased a house up in Jacksonville, where the university is, and we took some classes over there. Both of us did. And he has a degree from Texas Tech, but I think he was taking some accounting or something that was part of a master's
job skills
program.
Kind of stuff.
But he didn't really continue with it. I think
his background was in financial stuff. Stockbroker and things like this.
I, on the other hand, was more interested in decorating, and I was doing a correspondence. What do they call it? Home study, I guess is the term. Through the New York School of Interior Design.
Right,
so, they gave me a diploma of sorts, and because I'd had a lot of art and art history and studied design for a long time, in some of my various college efforts. And I started working as a decorator, but I did some show houses and things like that. But I didn't ever really get a full-scale business underway because of my mother's health problems, and that really took all my time.
Yeah.
And I mean, I still love decorating. I love the creative side of the business, but I do not have a head for business. And I hated that part. I hated dealing with deadlines and wrong things that get shipped, and it happens all the time, or delays, or and sometimes the decorator has to eat it when they make them, when your vendor makes a mistake.
Sure.
And so it just got to be a major headache, and I just decided I'd had enough of it. So some of my friends and family have employed my services more or less for free over the years, and of course my house is a never-ending decorating lab experiment.
Yeah,
so.
Your place is quite the showplace of your creativity, and it's we were talking after lunch just about how whenever I post photos, from here, and people see you're really amazing and lovely and sometimes wild and very colorful design, and but it's a nice place, and or they see your amazing food, and it's like, no, it's like, some people get the wrong impression about me. It's like, no, I didn't grow up like this. I grew up in the very different reality than you've been able to make for yourself, and you didn't either.
However, I will say that my parents encouraged my creativity, except when it came to the choice of a career.
Okay.
I don't think they thought being a decorator or a hairdresser or anything that I like doing. I love doing makeup and hair, and they didn't really see that as a proper career. They thought, I could be a school teacher or a nurse or possibly a secretary.
Well, you were known, you're an amazing chef. And I say that instead of cook.
Well,
no dishonor about cook, but
I was going to pursue that professionally at one point. But
right. And
then I married Ray, and he wants to eat all the time, and I got tired of cooking, so I decided I didn't want to be a chef.
It's funny how we like to eat on a daily basis. And writing, and you've pursued writing.
Well, I've always done that.
On and off. I mean, you've always pursued it, and you've had your periods where you were really down that rabbit hole.
I've written some books. I wrote a blog for 10 years.
Yeah. And I told you privately that I'm saying it now, and I think I'll leave this in, but I wish you'd write this up, including the stories that maybe I don't want to read, but it would be some pretty it'd be some pretty
probably quite a few.
It'd be some pretty compelling. Well, you were a hot young single woman in the 70s, for a chunk of the time. In the 80s, I remember this. You had some pretty rock and roll boyfriends, and
I did, I guess.
Yeah, there's no doubt, because I do remember.
They were just a blip.
I understand. Well, Ray's been hanging in 30 years, and he's
more patient.
He's got the patience of a saint, I think. But so, there's a lot that we can say. We said a lot, and I know this has gone more in depth than either one of us probably planned, which is not a bad thing. But as we sort of are on approach to land the plane, my last big bullet point on my notes here is kind of just, especially your thoughts, like this last 10 or so, it's actually, now it's been like 15 years since Mom died, 16 years, 17 years, Jesus. It's 2002.
17.
2002, God. But so what's this last period of time? What's, looking back where you are now, where you are now, and you sort of look back on everything you've been through, and of course we're always looking ahead as well to what's to come. What's your life like for you now? What do you think about things? How do you process when you think about what this has meant for you, your journey, what it means?
Well, I suppose I have a few regrets, but the one thing I never regretted was having you. I didn't have to.
Yeah, no, I know.
Because it was hard, and I knew.
It's kind of amazing.
That, because I already knew before I even married him that he was going to be a horrible husband and father.
Yeah.
And I knew very early on that I would stay long enough that you were old enough to go to school, assuming we didn't get killed.
And that was a very real possibility.
And then I was afraid that, also I didn't want you exposed to any more of that or see any more of his drunken rages and things like that. I just, because that stuff imprints on a child.
Oh yeah, it did. It did.
I was in therapy for years.
I was in therapy for years
too.
Well,
weren't we all?
Yeah.
And so, I suppose if things had been the way they are now, I still would have had you, but I wouldn't have married him.
Gotcha.
And I wouldn't have given you away either. I mean, because we wound up, it was just you and me. But as far as, looking back, I mean, I've made some hellacious mistakes in my life, and I guess there have been times when I'm even surprised that you're still speaking to me at one point. I used to be surprised at that because of things just would get so hard sometimes. But, tried to do the best I could, I suppose. I went through a period, I'm 74 now. And I went through a period in my 60s, I guess, around 10 years ago, that I thought about dying a lot. And then I got past it. I decided it was not there was really no point in dwelling on it because we're all going to die one of these days. And
were you worried about it, or were you hoping for it in a way?
No,
or?
I wasn't hoping for it. No, I was mostly angry about it.
You?
Well, it would preoccupy me, and I would think,
how so? Like you hadn't done some things you wanted to do, and your time was running
that was part of it, and I would get a little angry about that. That there were things I wanted to do, and then that if I had more advantages in my life, and then I thought, well, that's silly. There's so many people who had less than I did and achieved so much more. I mean, look at somebody like Dolly Parton, for instance, or somebody with a story like that, and I thought, well, maybe I wasn't destined to be rich and famous. I don't know. But, for my life now, I would have to say I do think about things a lot, but I don't worry about things like I used to. Except, I guess as we talked about a little earlier today, I've gotten rather paranoid about all these mass shootings in public because, and for several years now, ever since all this started, I don't like going places if I don't see a way out.
Yeah.
And I won't go to movie theaters anymore. Places like that. And I really, there's another thing to be said about living in a place like this where things are quiet here in the burbs.
Yeah.
Is that you do feel safer. Maybe a false sense of security, but you feel safer, and we like our quiet life. We don't like we're not either one overly extroverted. We're more introverts, both of us. And so we enjoy spending time alone and together and reading. Yeah. There are some things we enjoy watching on TV or Amazon Prime or something.
Yeah. Ray's been upstairs reading this all the time. We're down here talking.
We told him he had to be quiet.
Well, there's that, yeah. You can't turn on the subwoofers and watch a game.
Right. I mean, I have a lot of creative hobbies. And of course, the way I grew up, we touched on that yesterday when we talked about that a lot, about how I grew up in a rather quiet household. My parents had both grown up in very contentious households where people fought and yelled and all that, and neither one of them wanted that. And they made an agreement when they got married that they would not ever carry on and fight like that in front of children or anything like that. And if they had their disagreements, they did it when we were not around and behind closed doors and that sort of thing. And so, and we didn't have TV, so everybody read at night until it was time to go to bed. And I always liked to draw and paint, so I did that sometimes, and I still do that. I take it by spells, and nobody's ever going to accuse me of being Rembrandt, but it's something I enjoy.
You're good. You're good.
Something I enjoy. And I like designing things. Sometimes I get an idea in my head for, I'd like this room to look such and such a way, and I start sketching and making up little mood boards and things like that. Sometimes it comes to fruition, and sometimes it doesn't.
You absolutely could have. I mean, if you were the extroverted, in the alternate reality where you're an extrovert and could deal with all the nitty gritty business type details, you would be a hell of a production designer. You'd be a hell of a production designer for movies. Your skill set is that you could totally do that. We need this room to look like this. Okay, like you're the kind of person who can figure out how to do that, and like you have your art history.
I mean, I can walk in a room and see, but I just
you can size it up proportion wise. Sure. Oh, this thing will go here, but that won't fit.
And color, I would have to say my sense of color is very good, because I rarely take a swatch when I go to match paint or something, and I think I've been wrong once in my life that the color was off.
Nice.
It's just something that I can
uncanny.
do. I know it's just something.
And you mix some bold ass colors sometimes.
Well, I like that.
But
it
works
that way.
Yeah.
But I mean, as far as great philosophical questions about the great beyond, I've become rather skeptical that there is much after this life, and if there is, it will be a great surprise, I suppose. I would have to say I don't believe in the concept of heaven and hell anymore, like I was taught in my fundamentalist religion when my parents used to force that down my throat several times a week. I remember the first time somebody said to me, my mother does not believe in heaven or hell. She thinks it's right here on earth. And I thought, well, what a novel idea. I'd never heard anyone say anything like that before.
Yeah. Like you were pretty young and...
I was in my 20s.
Okay.
Yes, and it was an older man that I worked for briefly as his little secretary, and I think in Augusta, as a matter of fact. And this man, who was probably in his 60s then, told me that about his mother, and I thought, wow, that's pretty progressive for... I mean, that woman would have been 100 by then or something.
Time and place, like deep south
and
that
so,
time in history.
But anyway, I always read, and I would go through periods of... I guess I'm somewhat of an autodidact, so I always kind of educated myself even before I got myself back in a classroom. And the reason I never got a real college degree, despite having gone to college so many years, is because I would get so bored, and I would want to study something new and explore something else, and I just couldn't seem to... once I said, well, I know enough about that now and move on. And so I guess, as that applies to the way I think about what from here, I don't know. Yeah. Obviously, at the age of 74, and I'm pretty healthy and that sort of thing, I don't anticipate kicking the bucket anytime soon. But, of course, you never know about these things. Things can always happen. And it's kind of unsettling sometimes when I hear something about classmates or people I've known, who are younger than I am, and they're dying from these awful diseases or some circumstance.
And I'm 51, and I've had friends dropping for 10 years. Right. And that typically it was more accidents, but now it's health.
My first little jailbreak husband committed suicide. I have 2 first cousins on my mother's side. There were 13 of us cousins, and 2 of them have committed suicide.
I'm wearing this sweater that was part of a gift from one of my very best friends who had been a power lifter and then went hardcore back to like his tennis playing days and dropped a ton of weight and muscle and gave me money. And I love this sweater thing. And this is my buddy Jason, and one of the kindest, smartest, one of the most amazing people you'd ever meet. Blew his fucking brains out 2.5 years ago.
I don't know. It's really kind of hard to understand, I suppose.
Yeah.
But anyway, you do, by the time you're 74, you sort of have confronted your own mortality. Or in the case of my husband, he was 23 years old when he had a car wreck that almost killed him. So he had kind of come to grips with that very early on.
Yeah.
Which makes him like a much older person.
Right.
And that's what they actually told his parents, that people who'd had that type of experience and injuries that he had. And don't get me wrong, he's a very able-bodied person and able of mind.
Oh, he's
too.
Super fit. He's healthier now than I've been in 20 years.
But it took him a long time to I guess, to get to where he is now. He was always, I think he recovered physically much faster than he recovered emotionally and mentally.
Yeah, because he was in a horribly traumatic thing that really screwed him up.
It ended his career and all that sort of thing.
Yeah, he was essentially retired when you met him.
Oh, yeah, he was basically
He had been a big
retired,
rock star, but he was essentially retired in his late 20s.
Things, yes, but he, he keeps his mind and his body active.
Yeah. Well, and he went back to work some years ago just because he was bored.
Right, he did. He worked, and he decided, he did not like being a stockbroker anymore. He passed the Series 7 again and got himself hired by Regents Bank.
That was super impressive. These years later, and given the type of brain injury he had, I mean, as I learned from him and from you, filling me in, so I'd have some even more empathy for him, given what happened to him and stuff. The fact that he could think of doing that's crazy. The fact that he did it's amazing.
And he did it on his own. He got himself a sponsor. It was not like he was coached or anything. He would get off
picked
work.
Up the books.
Yeah, he worked for Lowe's and Home Depot both for a number of years, and because he liked being physically active.
Yeah.
And but that he would come home and study after a full day at work and then pass that exam with flying colors.
Which is still like one of the highest fail rates. I think it's a higher fail rate than med school
with a good grade. And but then decided I like working with my hands and being active, and he has learned to do so many things that that he's taught himself.
Oh yeah, and your home is there's the part of your home that he's built with his hands and the landscaping
he does all sorts of
and
things.
The knowledge of how to do all that stuff. It's like he could open a nursery if he wanted to, probably.
Well, yes, but he doesn't want to.
Well, I know. And I don't blame him.
Yes. I know. He enjoys being retired. Like I said, emotionally, he is like a much older person, which is why I think our 17-year age difference...
It's a lot flatter than that.
It doesn't matter a lot.
It's a lot shorter.
It just never mattered to either one of us, but, other people sometimes have an issue with it. I don't know. You can cut this out. If you want, but when I was in for my GYN annual physical this year, my doctor said something about, well, where have you been? What have you been doing? Have you made any interesting trips this year? And I said, well, we just got back from visiting my in-laws, which did not go well. And then in a minute he said, your in-laws? He said, how old are your in-laws? And I said, oh, they're in their mid-80s.
About 10 years older than me.
Well, my mother-in-law is 11 years older than I am. And my father-in-law, I guess, is 13 years older than I am. And he said, well, how old is your husband? And I said, 17 years younger than I am.
And
he said, and how long have you been married? And I said, 30 years. And he said, oh.
Well, I thought you were going to say he's your gynecologist. He's like, so, what have you been up to? I thought he was doing the exam.
Well, we won't get it.
I don't need any more detail in that regard.
We won't talk about that anymore.
He's like, wow, you're no dust down here. Oh, God.
Anyway.
That's funny. Well, this is what happens when you grow up the way we did together.
That's true.
Together.
That's true.
Well, Mom, I really appreciate you having the chat, sitting down and doing this. It's really meant a lot. And
okay.
Do you have any other anything you want to say or you thought about, even if it doesn't? You don't have to try to connect the dots in a linear way. Is there anything that occurred to you that you want to throw onto the recording while we're still doing that?
Yes, I wish you'd move back to the USA.
Well, yeah. Let me see how the next series of events go, and that might be happening at some point. Well, all right. Well, thank you so much. This has been real. It's been
you're
nice.
Quite welcome. I think you're very good at what you do.
Thank you. Love you.
Love you too.
All right, well, I hope you enjoyed that and that you have checked out the whole series or will shortly if you have not yet. Don't forget that there are a lot of other episodes, so if you search through your podcatcher, wherever you're listening to this, you'll see a lot of great interviews with fascinating people. And also I have How China Works if you're interested in China-specific topics. And speaking of China, I'll mention this. This is going to kind of carbon date this pretty well. The news about this coronavirus broke just in the last couple of weeks. And I had been, as of this afternoon, very respectful but fairly nonchalant and non-worried about it. And I'm not saying that I'm worried, but things are developing very fast. There are new developments, new issues with travel restrictions in various places. And because I'm close to starting a big movie project, not in China, I have come to the decision I am basically going to get out of here as soon as I can. By the time you listen to this, if you don't listen to it as it goes live, I'm looking to leave hopefully the beginning of this next week and get back to the West Coast and sort of ride it out. So thoughts and prayers is a bit of a cliche, but it's kind of all we have right now if you're not a doctor or otherwise like a medical scientist. So thoughts and prayers to affected people, and fingers crossed that this does not go as bad as it could. I feel people have asked this opinion. I'll just offer it up here. I feel like from everything I've read and see and talking to friends who know more about this, friends who work at the embassy, for instance, that China really learned the lessons from SARS as well as they could and have been modeling how such a thing would be dealt with in the future. And so I feel like they're on it as well as they can be. But at the same time, There are some quarantines like Hubei province where the epicenter is at Wuhan, which is in Hubei province. That is entirely on lockdown for incoming and outbound traffic. And I just don't want to be in a situation where I'm kind of stuck in Beijing for who knows how many months. In my case, I don't know what I can do other than bring you these conversations. Hopefully there are some insights, some things to learn, or just things to enjoy and pass some time and put a smile on your face. Regardless of why you listen to the shows, I hope you enjoy it. You can reach me online at pretty much all the social media. I'm pretty easily searchable. You can also visit my website, crazyinagoodway.com. It's basically a bio page, and then there's a contact page, so you can always write to me there, and I'll get right back to you as soon as I can. Thanks again for listening. I will be back next week with the Chris Vogler episode, and in the meantime, have a great week.